Welcome learners. The title of today's presentation is Generic Understanding of Blended Learning. This session will focus primarily on the concept of blended learning, models of blended learning. We will present a brief overview, blended learning structures, and lastly, some teaching principles that support blended learning in teaching learning assessment system. Here is a definition given by Garrison and Vaughan in 2008, and this definition entails and often considered to be the simplest definition of blended learning. It is defined as the use of traditional classroom teaching methods together with the use of online learning for the same students studying the same content in the same course, and it is a thoughtful fusion of face-to-face and online learning experiences. Dear learners, through this definition, we open up many aspects and domains under the ambit of blend and blended learning, isn't it? It talks about judicious mix of traditional classroom teaching methods with that of the use of online learning. Again, it talks about the thoughtful fusion of face-to-face and online learning experiences. This is a vast space of teaching learning assessment ecosystem. And the most important is the blended learning caters to the same students studying for the same content in the same course. So it is a very systematic approach of technology enabled teaching learning. Let us go through the basic models of blended learning. The visual on the screen depicts three major models of blended learning. The very first one is named as blended presentation and interaction, and the figure clearly represents two aspects: face-to-face sessions surrounded by online activities. Coming to the next model is blended block model. From presentation and interaction, we are shifting to block model. Now the last model, which is also considered as one of the basic model of blended learning, it is the fully online. This takes us to a confusing state, isn't it? How can a blended learning model be fully online? Few minutes back, I was discussing about the synchronous and asynchronous activities. In fully online, it is a judicious, thoughtful and systematic blend of synchronous activities and asynchronous activities. One who designs a learning environment in a blended mode will thoughtfully choose to create his or her lessons through this fully online, which is again a thoughtful mix of online activities under synchronous and asynchronous mode. We will now discuss on the 7 blended learning structures in education. The visual reflects the 7 structures numbered from 1 to 7. Number 1 is blended face-to-face class. The names are very interesting and it carries to great extent the meaning and nature of that particular structure. Number 2 is blended online class. Again, you can see two aspects which are already embedded in the name of the structures. We move on to the third structure, which is the flipped classroom. Most of us are aware of the word flipped, aren't we? Now we move on to the fourth structure of blended learning. This is the rotation model. Again, the name has a cue towards the blend of learning structure. Number 5 is the self-blend model. The self carries the meaning individualized. Number 6 is very interestingly named as the blended MOOC. Many of us are aware of the acronym MOOC, Massive Open Online Course. 7 is flexible mode courses. Again, here the word flexible carries with it some judicious mix. So these are the 7 blended learning configurations in education. We will now discuss one by one briefly with its specific nature and characteristics. The first one, blended face-to-face class or face-to-face driver model. Here what do we find? The visual talks about face-to-face driver. What is it? The teacher drives instruction with technology introduced on a case-by-case basis. So it is very individualized in nature. And the figure denotes the teacher with a class of students having computer or a laptop in front of them. And the teacher with her stick, maybe a pointer, with a board. It can be a chalkboard or a whiteboard. Now this model hovers the teacher driving instructions and the technology is introduced on a case-by-case basis. The second one, blended online class, or it is also known by the term online driver model. There are two images on the screen and the online driver is described as students work through the curriculum from remote locations with all their instruction completed via online platforms. Students have access to course teachers for check-ins. The meaning of flipping the classroom is very rationally depicted in this image. We see two modes. One is a teacher, perhaps an instructor or a facilitator on the screen, full swing with the teaching, learning, instruction process. On the other hand, we find a full-fledged classroom, isn't it? The rotation model. There are 3 types of rotation: station rotation, lab rotation and individual rotation. The name itself carries scraps of information on the particulars of the model. Nevertheless, let us discuss one by one. Under the structure rotation model, let us first describe the station rotation. The image on the screen is vivid and it clearly shows that this model has students who rotate between learning stations set up in the classroom. And lastly, independent work. Yes, of course, students complete individual assignments or practice exercises. Now, as a part of the lesson that is being delivered in any learning environment, under station rotation model, the entire lesson could be designed through these activities. Now, these activities are performed in groups. So, this group or assigned activity to a particular set of students is termed as stations, and the stations can be rotated. So, teacher led instruction, technology center, small group activities, independent work. The actual lesson is divided among 4 stations and it can be rotated accordingly. The visual on the screen shows 4 squares. These are named and captioned as direct instruction, for example, maths or science, any subject we can take into account. Direct instruction can be literacy or social studies. Direct instruction, literacy, social studies, and then the last one, learning lab, could be reading and math. Now these 4 squares represented in the 4 quadrants actually defines and clarifies the attributes of lab rotation model. Similar to the station rotation, the lab rotation model has a focus on technology-based activities. Here lies the difference between station rotation and lab rotation. Here the 2 stations that functions in full swing are teacher-led instruction, that is, the teacher provides direct instruction to the students, and the second one is the technology lab, where students engage in technology-based activities under teacher guidance. Individual rotation model. Now this is a large image which has captions like online learning, offline learning, teacher, and professional or paraprofessional. In individual rotation model, we find students rotate between learning stations based on their individual needs and learning style. Teacher-led instruction. This is the teacher provides direct instruction to a small group of students. Technology center, students work on technology-based activities. Small group activities, that is, students collaborate on projects or problem solving activities. And lastly, there is another group called independent work. The students complete individual assignments or practice exercises. So these are the 3 models under the structure rotation models. Self-blend model. What is a self-blend model? And what does these 2 figures on the visuals represent? One figure denotes a teacher or a facilitator with students in the class, whilst the other we see a student in front of a computer or a laptop. Now, students undertake traditional classes before enrolling in online coursework to support their studies. So, this is called a self-blend. Then comes the interesting structure, the blended MOOC. The blended MOOC is a form of flipped classroom. Remember the flipped classroom structure we have discussed few minutes back? And it uses in-person class meetings to supplement a massive open online course. So in order to supplement MOOC, some classroom activities, face-to-face direct instructions can be also made alongside a MOOC. And under this blended MOOC, in order to know this particular structure, the visuals further takes you to two types of MOOC. One is X MOOC and the other is C. The X MOOCs focus on scalability, whereas the C MOOCs focus on community and connections. And as you can see, the MOOC has its various advantages which helps a learner to pursue it, to make choice of courses under MOOC, because it is open to all, it is massive, it can enroll innumerable learners in a course at one point of time. Registration is open. We come to flexible mode courses as one of the 7 blended learning structures. And as the figure suggests, that there are many options where the students can choose. The instructor can create a lesson, the instructor can plan a session through which it can create groups, which is possible online and offline too. We find breakout room. For example, in Zoom, you can go for breakout rooms, where in this visual we find that 5:1 student ratio with the instructor or facilitator. It can be 12:1. Then again, for online courses, for online sessions, there can be breakout rooms 12:1, can be science, some lab which can be seen, which are based on simulations, virtual lab. So an instructor can create these breakout rooms to venture into the varied learning experiences aligned to the lesson objectives to earn the maximum learning outcomes. So this flexible mode courses gives flexibility to the learners, teaching principles that support blended learning. We have discussed and have gained a thorough understanding of blended learning through its concept. Blended learning is more than just a combination of delivery methods, because it includes a new way of thinking about teaching and learning. Different form of teacher's role are noticed, and it is different from the lecturer role as expert in traditional face-to-face teaching, or the role of tutor or a facilitator in traditional distance education, because a blended teacher is actively and collaboratively designing, facilitating and directly learning and directing learning. So a blended learning environment calls for a blended teacher who is neither a lecturer, expert, nor a facilitator or a tutor alone in an open and distance mode of education. Rather, he or she should be also a blended teacher. And blended teacher is defined one who is actively collaborating, designing, facilitating, and directing learning. This is just because the structures that blended learning offers and the models that describe the blended learning mode of teaching learning process requires a thorough designing, a planning beforehand, and an execution with acumen and finesse. There are certain principles that support blended learning. Can you guess any one of the principles that support blended learning? Because by now we have discussed the models, the structures, and also the basis behind these principles that make a blended learning environment and a teacher who is ready to take on this blended teaching learning milieu. I think you can guess for the first principle or maybe the essence behind the principle. As I'm giving you a hint, a teacher who is going for a blended learning or a blended instructional session should be very active, should be collaborating, designing beforehand, facilitating and directing learning. So he or she is actually designing for open communication and trust, isn't it? So the first principle that support blended learning is designed for open communication and trust. Designed for critical reflection and discourse. Open communication, building trust in the community goes with critical reflection and discourse too. It is important that students learn to think carefully about what they believe to be true and to share their ideas carefully and thoughtfully. This means being able to identify their thoughts and feelings when responding to course content in relation to their own experiences, opinions, events, or even new information. Number 3, create and sustain a sense of community. This means the opportunity to learn together and even teach each other in a peer teaching setting too. That learning is enhanced through collaborative engagement of learning with others. As learners review and share the course material through online postings, the ensuing dialogue, whether it is in person or online, is where knowledge is constructed and assimilated. However, the support from the teachers, facilitators, the discussants, or the expert supports this interaction among the students and learners, allowing them to proceed with confidence and realized learning. The fourth principle, support purposeful inquiry. It refers to active intellectual processing during learning. This is meant to be in contrast to passive acceptance and memorization of presented facts and informations. The inquiry leads students to build knowledge that brings about deep understanding. The fifth principle, ensure students sustain collaboration. It is the development of new knowledge for learners, and this is a recent addition to educational practices in a technology-friendly environment. Because this need for students to work collaboratively refers not only to new ways of learning and remembering course material, but also to skills required for graduates who must live and work in a complex, interconnected social and economic world. Ensure assessment is congruent with intended learning outcomes. The teaching learning milieu which supported blended learning should culminate in the assessment, and this assessment should be aligned with the intended learning outcome of the lesson or session. So planning detailed learning outcomes, ensuring the design of activities that lead to attaining these outcomes, and most importantly ensuring their alignment with learning assessment are the signs of a sound and effective blended learning environment. So here we come to three broad types of assessment. These three types are self-assessment, peer assessment, and teacher assessment. Since blended learning calls for collaboration, coordination, inquiry-based critical reflection, hence in order to meet and be congruent with the learning outcomes, these three types of assessment can support the learning outcome. Putting the generic understanding of blended learning together. As we see the two extremities of the arrow, traditional face-to-face to completely online, we find three blocks: technology enhanced, blended learning, and mostly online. The blended learning environment should be congruent to the learning outcomes. And learner needs and preparedness for blended learning is very important. That is, need for flexibility, technical skill, technology access, and learning preferences. Because learning style is an important factor to maximize the learning outcome, no matter what sort of device, tools, technology you use. So blended learning gives the room and space to the facilitator or the designer to create a learning environment by systematically blending through a thoughtful plan. Most learners will have the relatively simple and common skills of listening and note taking in the classroom. This is the reason it is important to assess the learner's need. Often it is seen that working online requires different skills, but the more convenient, media-rich online environment offers increased engagement opportunities for diverse learners. We see that intended outcomes of the curriculum is very important to decide its teaching and learning activities vis-a-vis the assessment regime. The outcomes are formulated first. From these, the assessment criteria are developed. Once an appropriate assessment regime has been designed, activities are organized that will teach the student how to meet the assessment criteria. And what the teacher does and what the students do are aimed at achieving the outcomes by meeting the assessment criteria, isn't it? This takes advantage of the known tendency of students to learn what they think will be assessed and is called backwash. So this is all about the generic understanding of blended learning. And additionally, let us take a look at some of the synchronous and asynchronous activities, because in blended learning environment, this synchronous and asynchronous takes a center stage, be it face-to-face physical or face-to-face online. These are some of the synchronous learning activities as the figure depicts, which are very clear and understandable that we can use these synchronous learning activities in designing our lessons in blended mode of teaching learning. Here are some examples of asynchronous learning activities which could be used to create a blended learning environment. We come to some critical questions to review. When deciding how much synchronous learning to include in your blend, what are the costs to learners of being required to engage synchronously? Because we know online synchronous requires more data. Do the benefits of increased immediate support and dialogue outweigh the cost of being required to engage synchronously? Which is the extrapolated question of the first one. And are the costs of travel and time to be present in person greater than the costs of having to ensure the necessary bandwidth and the skill development to participate synchronously online? There are some innovative trends in evaluation and assessment of blended learning environment. These are some of the examples. Summative evaluation strategies include open book examination, group examinations, spoken or speaking examinations, on demand examinations. In case of formative evaluation strategies, we have e-portfolio, creative products, classroom or online quizzes. Apart from the self-made assessment, peer assessment, and teacher-made assessment, these are some of the summative and formative evaluation strategies that can be judiciously used as per congruent to the learning outcomes of the lesson. Let us reconcile. We can conclude that designing for blended learning requires writing the learning objectives and learning outcomes, student need assessment, and aligning the assessment with the learning objectives. In order to develop blended learning, online platforms, creating learning activities based on blended learning best practices, we can customize as needed for context and learners in every design. It is not a one-time go. Finding, using, and creating open content is another way out. And learning assessment strategies available in blended learning. So these are some of the aspects that describes the generic understanding of blended learning. Its summarized advantages are the flexibility, the differentiation, that is, it can be adapted to meet the needs of diverse learners. The technology integration, that is, incorporating technology to enhance learning experiences, are some of the few advantages which take blended learning into the next level, and it is an edge over other learning options like fully online or fully traditional. There are some reflective questions